The morning Gwangjang market smelled like sesame oil and second chances. That was what Adaeze had told herself every morning for 3 years. Every time she pulled Kofi's little hand through the narrow lanes between vendors, every time she smiled at the Halmini who sold her bindiadik on credit, every time she breathed in the cold Seoul air and reminded herself, "You made it. You survived. He cannot find you here." She had believed it. She had been a fool. It was the car that she noticed first, not the sound of it, though the low, predatory growl of its engine cut through the market noise like a blade. Not even the color, that particular shade of black that swallowed light rather than reflected it, the kind of black that only old money could afford to choose. It was the stillness of it. In a street where everything moved, vendors, tourists, schoolchildren, the whole breathing chaos of a Seoul morning. That car was perfectly, deliberately, terrifyingly still. Adeeze's hand tightened on Kofi's shoulder. Her son looked up at her. 5 years old. Round cheeks, her mother's wide eyes, but everything else, every single other thing about him, belonged to a man she had spent 3 years trying to forget. The jaw, the brow, the particular way he held his chin when he was watching something with serious attention. Like right now. Because Kofi was looking at the car too. The door opened, and the world stopped. He was taller than she remembered. That was the first thought. Irrational, irrelevant. He was taller, or perhaps 3 years of convincing yourself someone had shrunk in importance made the reality of them overwhelming. Kang Dae-hyun stepped onto the pavement in a charcoal suit that cost more than Adeeze's monthly rent. His hair swept back from a face that Seoul's gossip columns called untouchably handsome, and that she had once called, in a whispered moment, she would never get back home. He was not looking at her. He was looking at Kofi. And Kofi, her brilliant, fearless, catastrophically curious 5-year-old, was looking back at him with the particular solemn recognition of a child who has grown up studying a photograph in secret and suddenly finds himself standing in front of the real thing. Run. The word detonated somewhere in Adeeze's chest before it reached her brain. Run. Run. Run now. Pick him up and run, and do not look back, because if he has found you here, then nowhere is safe, and you always knew this day. Dae-hyun's eyes moved from the boy to her, and Adeeze Okonkwo, who had crossed an ocean to escape this man, who had built an entire life out of distance and silence, and the fierce animal love of a mother with no other weapons left, felt her legs turn to water beneath her. Because he didn't look angry. He didn't look cold. He looked like a man who had just found something he had given up searching for. And that was so much worse. To understand what was standing in that market, you have to go back. You have to go back 4 years, to a different city, a different version of Adeeze, 26 years old, Lagos Bright, working as a junior architect at a firm that had just landed a contract with a Korean development company. You have to go back to the night her senior colleague pulled her aside before a client dinner and said, with the casual authority of someone delivering a weather forecast, "Be nice to the Korean side. One of them is bringing their man. He's young, he's brilliant, he barely talks, and he tips like a god." She had been nice. She had not expected him to be kind. The dinner was at a rooftop restaurant in Victoria Island, the kind of place where the Lagos skyline spreads out below you like an offering, and the wine is imported, and everyone is performing a version of themselves for everyone else. Adeeze had taken her seat, smoothed her dress, opened her menu, and looked up. And there he was. Kang Dae-hyun, 29 years old. Sharp jaw, expensive watch, eyes that moved around the room with the quiet assessment of a man who had learned early that rooms were information. He was the stillest person at a table full of loud, ambitious, laughing people. He sat like someone who had never needed to fill silence with sound. She was seated directly across from him. For the first 20 minutes, neither of them spoke to the other. Then the power went out. Because this was Lagos, and this was a Thursday. In the 5 minutes of warm darkness before the generator kicked in, while their colleagues laughed and waved phone torches and the restaurant staff rushed around with candles, a voice said, very quietly, directly across from her, "Are you afraid of the dark?" And she had laughed. Genuinely, completely, the kind of laugh that surprises you on its way out. "I'm Nigerian," she said. "The dark is basically my second language." A pause. Then, in the candlelight that flickered back to life, he said, "Teach me a word." She taught him obim, my heart, in Igbo. She did not know then what she was handing him. The affair, though that word was too thin for what it was, too breathless and temporary. Began 6 weeks later, when the project brought him back to Lagos for a second visit, and he called the number she had given him professionally and said, with no preamble at all, "I would like to see you." Not the restaurant. Something real. Something real. She had taken him to Balogun Market. She had watched a man in a suit that cost more than some cars navigate the heaving, beautiful chaos of one of West Africa's greatest markets with the focused attention of a scholar encountering a new text. He didn't perform enthusiasm. He just looked at everything. The fabric mountains, the herb sellers, the boys balancing impossible loads on their heads, the way light moved differently here, thick and amber and full of particulate gold. He bought a single piece of osso oak from an old woman who barely acknowledged him. He held it like it was significant. That evening, on a plastic chair outside a buka in Surulere, eating egusi soup with his jacket folded across his lap and sweat on his brow and absolute peace on his face, he said, "I have eaten in 31 countries. This is the best meal of my life." She believed him. Because Dae-hyun, whatever else he was, whatever she would later learn he was, did not say things he did not mean. They were together for 8 months before she first went to Seoul. 8 months of Lagos and longing, of the particular electricity of a love conducted partly across distance and time zones. Early morning voice notes, late-night video calls, the violent sweetness of reunions in airport arrivals halls. 8 months of learning him. The way he took his coffee, the particular coldness that descended when someone disrespected someone he loved, the scar below his left collarbone he would not explain, the way he said her name, Ada, as though the word tasted like something precious. 8 months of not asking the questions she should have asked. Who are you, really? Where does this money come from? Why do the men around you at those dinners have the flat, watchful eyes of soldiers? Why do people flinch when your name enters a room before you do? She didn't ask. Love, she would later tell herself bitterly, is the most expensive willful blindness in the world. Seoul in November was everything Lagos was not, and that contrast was its own kind of love affair. The cold was clean and honest. The streets were ordered, lit with the precise geometry of a city that had rebuilt itself from rubble through sheer collective will. She remembers walking with Dae-hyun through Bukshin Hanok village on her second evening, the traditional tiled rooftops dark against a white sky, threatening snow, his hand warm and certain around hers. "Do you like it?" he had asked. Meaning the city. Meaning, do you understand me better now that you can see where I was made? "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," she said. She was looking at him when she said it. He took her to Gyeongbokgung at dawn, before the tourists arrived, when the palace grounds were mist and silence, and the particular dignity of a place that has survived centuries of being wanted by powers that believe they had the right to take it. He told her about his grandmother, who had brought him here every year on her birthday. He told her, and it was the most she had ever heard him say in one breath, about learning to be quiet, about how silence, for him, was not absence but presence, the way he paid attention to things that mattered. "You talk to me," she said, surprised by her own observation, "more than you talk to anyone else." He looked at her for a long moment. "You listen like nothing I say could frighten you." She should have told him then, that some things said out loud become prayers, that she was listening, yes, but she was also building a version of him inside herself that she would have to demolish, piece by excruciating piece, in a future she couldn't yet see. She didn't. She kissed him instead, in the mist of Gyeongbokgung Palace, while the city woke around them. And it was the most beautiful mistake of her life. The first crack appeared at a dinner she was never supposed to attend. 3 months into her Seoul stay, deep in the comfortable architecture of what felt increasingly permanent, Dae-hyun was called away to a last-minute meeting and asked her to wait at the restaurant. His associates would be there. They knew her. It would be fine. It was not fine. She arrived to find not the 2 junior colleagues she'd expected, but 8 men she had never seen, arranged around a private dining room with the quiet, load-bearing deference of people in the presence of something significant. And at the head of the table sat an old man with a face like weathered granite and eyes that had the absolute stillness of something that had stopped needing to threaten people because its reputation had long since made threats redundant. He looked at Adaeze when she entered and said nothing. Everyone in the room went very, very still. She learned his name later that night, from a woman in the bathroom, a wife of one of the associates, warm-faced and saculescent, who grabbed Adaeze's arm with the urgent grip of someone delivering a warning disguised as gossip. "You know who his father is," she said. "Not a question. You know about the Kang family." Adaeze did not know. The woman's face changed. "The Kang family. You will not find that name in any newspaper, not attached to anything criminal, not connected to any of the 3 police investigations that had opened and closed over 20 years like respectful curtains around something too large to be contained by law. You will find it attached to logistics companies and construction firms and a charitable foundation. You will find Kang Dae-hyun listed as CEO of Kang Development Group, which is true in the way that the surface of a river is true, real, present, and concealing everything that matters below it. What you will not find, in any official record, is the thing that woman whispered to Adaeze that night. The Kang family did not build their empire with concrete and glass. Adaeze drove home through Seoul in the rain, the city lights bleeding red and gold across the wet streets, and she tried to arrange the last 8 months into a shape that made sense. She held the architecture of their relationship up to this new light and watched different shadows fall across it. The men with flat eyes. The phone calls he left rooms to take. The particular way he had of making people understand, without ever raising his voice, that a line had been reached. She thought about the scar below his left collarbone. She thought about the fact that she was 3 months pregnant. And she understood, with the cold, clarifying precision of a woman who has just walked through a door that cannot be reopened, that the life she was carrying inside her was also the heir to something she wanted no part of. She left on a Tuesday. She packed what she could carry. She transferred her savings to an account he didn't know existed. She called her cousin Chisholm in London, who called her friend Hannah in Seoul, who had a contact in Busan, and by the time Dae-hyun came home that evening to an apartment that held only the ghost of her perfume and a single line written on the back of a restaurant receipt. "I love you. I cannot stay. Please don't look." Adaeze was already on a bus, heading south, planning the next disappearance. He looked anyway. Of course he looked. For 3 months, she moved. Busan to Tokyo. Tokyo to Nairobi. Nairobi to London. Then, in a decision that would strike anyone outside her situation as madness but made a particular desperate sense to her, she came back. Not to Seoul. To the margins of Seoul. A small apartment in Mapogu, a neighborhood busy enough to disappear in, quiet enough to rebuild in. She had Kofi in a hospital in Sinchon on a Tuesday morning in spring, alone except for a midwife who called her Yoni and held her hand. She named him after her grandfather. She decided to stay. The one place he wouldn't look, she told herself, is where I just was. For 3 years, she was right. Back to the market. Back to this moment that is cracking open 3 years of careful ordinary life, like a fault line expressing itself. Dae-hyun had not moved. He was standing exactly where he had stepped out of the car, one hand resting on the open door, the other loose at his side, and his eyes were moving between her face and Kofi's with the expression of a man performing an internal calculation whose answer he had already half known and is only now confirming. Kofi, because he was 5 and therefore fearless in the way only the very young can afford to be, had not looked away. "Yama," he said quietly. "That man is looking at us." "I know, baby. He looks like the picture." She had told herself, over and over, in the rational architecture of 3 in the morning, that Kofi knowing Dae-hyun's face was harmless. Children deserved to know where they came from, even if they couldn't go there. She had a single photograph, one she'd taken herself, him reading by a window before everything, his face unguarded and unexpectedly soft, and she had kept it in a small box on a high shelf and taken it down occasionally and felt, she was not proud of this, an ache that no amount of common sense had ever successfully treated. Kofi had found it at age 4 and asked, with the devastating directness of small children, who the man was. She had said, "Someone I knew once." He had studied the photograph for a long moment. "He looks sad," Kofi had said. She had put the photograph away and not answered. Now, in the market, Dae-hyun took one step forward. Not aggressive, not hesitant. The step of a man who had decided something. And Adaeze moved, her body independent of her brain, pure instinct, placing herself between him and Kofi with the exact unconscious precision of 3 years of imagining this moment. She felt Kofi's small hands grip the back of her jacket. Dae-hyun stopped. He looked at her hands, her posture, the way she was standing. Something crossed his face that she recognized despite 3 years of trying to forget every specific calibration of his expressions. Not anger, not the cold distance she had built him into in her memory that made it easier to justify her choices. Pain. Ada. One word. Her name. The short version. The one he had always used, and it landed in the middle of her chest with the precision of something thrown by a person who had always known exactly where her gravity was. Don't, she said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. She was grateful for that. 3 years, he said, not accusing, noting. I looked. I know you looked. I thought. He stopped. And this was the thing about Dae-hyun. He never said things he hadn't finished thinking. The pause was not weakness. It was accuracy. I thought you were dead. She had not anticipated that. The market moved around them, indifferent. A grandmother pushed past with a cart. 2 teenagers photographed Teok in a window. The city poured its ordinary Wednesday morning around this extraordinary stillness. 2 people standing in the space between a history and a reckoning. A child pressed against his mother's back, not quite understanding what he was witnessing, but understanding the weight of it with the precise animal intelligence of a child who loves his mother. He's my son, she said. Meaning, don't. Meaning, you know what you are and you know what that means, and I am asking you, in the only language we ever shared that was entirely honest, please. Dae-hyun looked at Kofi, and Kofi, from behind his mother's back, looked solemnly up at him. He is also mine, Dae-hyun said, very quietly, and Adaeze understood that this conversation was not the danger. The conversation was over. He didn't try to take Kofi. Not then, not in the market, not in the way she had rehearsed in nightmares. He didn't summon the men she knew were somewhere nearby, because there were always men nearby. That was the nature of what he was, the gravitational requirement of his position. He didn't make a scene. He was Kang Dae-hyun. He didn't need scenes. He said, have dinner with me. She said no. He said, then I will have my lawyers contact you before Friday. She said, about what? He said, my son. And then, because he had always been able to read her more precisely than she was comfortable with. I am not going to hurt you, Ada. I have never. I would never. I just want to know him. She took Kofi home by a different route. 3 different buses, a route she'd only ever memorized for emergencies, changing directions twice in Hongdae, where the crowds were thick enough to swallow 2 people whole. She locked the apartment door and sat on the kitchen floor, while Kofi ate rice crackers and watched cartoons, and she ran through her options with the focused clarity of a woman who had done this before. She could run again. She had always known she could run again. The infrastructure was maintained, the emergency contacts still viable, the account still accessible. But Kofi was 5 now. He had a school. He had a best friend named Jimin who gave him half his kimbap every lunch and whom Kofi loved with the total devotion of early childhood friendship. He had a Saturday art class and a library card and a favorite restaurant and a life. A real, rooted, specific life. And every time she had imagined running before she had imagined it getting harder with each passing year, Kofi accruing anchors, until the day would come when running would cost him more than staying. Maybe that day was now. Maybe it had come early and dressed itself as a black car in a market. She called Chisholm that night. Chisholm, who had helped her disappear 4 years ago and had never once said I told you so about any of it, which was the specific quality of her love that Adaeze had depended on more than she could measure. He found you, Chisholm said. Not a question. In the market. In front of Kofi. How did Kofi? He knew the face. She, Adaeze said, and her voice fractured slightly on the single syllable, which it hadn't done in front of Dae-hyun, which it hadn't done while Kofi was watching. What do I do? Chisholm was quiet for a long time. Then, what does he want? He says he wants to know his son. And you believe him? She was quiet. I believe that's part of it. She agreed to the dinner. Not because she was no longer afraid. Not because she trusted him. Trust was a structure that had to be rebuilt, if it could be rebuilt at all, from whatever remained. She agreed because the alternative was litigation, and litigation meant visibility, and visibility was the one thing she had spent 3 years systematically destroying. She arranged it herself. A restaurant in Insadong she knew well, small, well-lit, populated, public enough that nothing could be private enough to be dangerous. She brought Kofi, because she would not leave him with anyone while Dae-hyun knew where she was, and because some part of her, the part she was not ready to examine, wanted to see what happened when they were in the same room. What happened was this. Kang Dae-hyun, the man whose name made boardrooms quiet and whose family's reach extended across 3 countries' worth of gray market commerce, sat across a restaurant table from a 5-year-old boy and was completely undone. It was not dramatic. It was the opposite of dramatic. It was small and specific and devastating in the way that only true things can be. Kofi asked him, with the parliamentary confidence of a child accustomed to having his questions taken seriously, why his jacket had so many buttons. Dae-hyun looked at his own jacket as though he had never considered it before. "I'm not sure," he said. "I think someone else decided that." Kofi considered this. "You should decide your own buttons." And from Dae-hyun, something that Adaeze had seen only a small number of times in 8 months. A genuine, unguarded, unperformed smile. "You're right," he said. "I should." She watched this and felt, simultaneously, the deep, inconvenient love she had never successfully managed to excavate from herself, and the cold, clarifying knowledge that a man being tender with his son was not evidence of safety. That the version of Dae-hyun that had destroyed her certainty about him was not cancelled by this version. That both were true, and that the truth of both of them was the exact problem. She had loved him completely and correctly. She had also been right to run. Both things. At the same time. Forever. After Kofi fell asleep against her shoulder, trust deferred to comfort. She and Dae-hyun sat in the quiet of the restaurant over tea that had gone cold, and he talked. He told her what she'd left him with. He did it without self-pity, which was the only way she could have heard it. He said, "I thought I had done something. That you had seen something in me that." He stopped. "I have spent 3 years trying to understand which specific thing I did to make you leave without giving me the chance. I didn't leave because of something you did," she said. "I left because of what you are." He was silent for a moment. "I know what you found out. Do you deny it?" "No." The word landed without ceremony. No deflection, no minimization. Just no, flat and clear, the acknowledgement she had both needed and feared. "Then you understand," she said quietly, "why I couldn't stay. I understand why you thought you couldn't." He stopped, and then said, with the particular precision of a person choosing words like they are choosing footholds on difficult terrain, "Let me be someone he's not afraid of. Whatever I am, let me be his father." And then her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. No text, just a photograph. Her building, taken from street level. Her window, her specific window, circled in red. She turned the phone toward him. She watched the transformation, not dramatic, not the sudden revealing of a mask, but the specific, incremental dropping of the person he'd been performing for the last 2 hours as the version of himself that had survived inside that world re-established occupancy. His jaw set. His eyes went flat and very, very focused. She caught fragments of his phone call. Apartment, mother and child, who authorized. She picked up Kofi. Her son stirred, mumbled, pressed his face into her neck with the boneless trust of a sleeping child. She held him too tightly. He didn't notice. "It's not me," Dae-hyun said. He said it looking at her directly, with the quality of attention that had always been his most disarming weapon. The sense, the visceral sense, that you were the only thing in his field of vision. "This is not from me. Your family. My father." And here was the thing she had never known. The thing that had been operating below the surface of the last 3 years, the machinery beneath the machinery. Dae-hyun finding her today had not been coincidence. His father had known about Kofi's existence for 6 months, fed information by sources inside the network that even Dae-hyun's authority didn't fully contain. Had monitored, had waited, not for a happy reunion, for leverage. In the Kang family's particular grammar of power, an heir was an asset. And an heir's unaffiliated, foreign, untethered mother, a woman with no loyalty, no obligations, no debt to the family name, was a liability that needed to be either controlled or resolved. "He sent me the address," Dae-hyun said slowly. 2 days ago. He told me you'd run if I didn't come in person." His voice had the quality of a man understanding something about himself he does not enjoy understanding. "He used me to find you. And now he has us both," Adaeze said. Kofi slept on her shoulder. Outside the restaurant, Seoul continued its beautiful, indifferent night. The Han River somewhere in the darkness beyond the lit streets. The smell of rain beginning on the wind, that specific Seoul rain smell of concrete and cold, and something almost botanical that she had never smelled anywhere else, and that she realized with a grief that surprised her, come to think of as home. I won't let him touch him, Dae-hyun said. Or you. You're his heir, she said. You're not. I am the only person in this city with the authority to put a wall between my father and the two of you. A beat. And I will. But Ada, you have to trust me. She looked at him. She thought about Balogun Market and Gyeongbokgung in the mist and obim. She thought about a restaurant receipt on a kitchen counter, one line, and a bus south in the dark, and Kofi born in the spring, alone and fierce in hers. She thought about a photograph on a high shelf. About a 5-year-old who said he looked sad and was right. She thought about the fact that of all the cities in the world, she had come back to this one. What do you need me to do? She said. And Kang Dae-hyun, who had not allowed himself to feel relief in front of anyone in longer than he could remember, exhaled. This is not a story with a clean ending. It is a story in progress. It is the kind of story where the right choice and the safe choice are not the same thing, where love and danger share a zip code, where a woman is not choosing between running and staying, but between two versions of courage. That night, Adaeze and Kofi did not go back to her apartment. They went somewhere Dae-hyun had arranged, somewhere his father's network didn't have coordinates for, secured by the fraction of his own operations that answered to him and him alone. Kofi slept through the transfer, woke once to ask where they were going, accepted somewhere safe with the philosophical flexibility of a child who trusts his mother absolutely, and slept again. In the car, heading through Seoul's rain-wet midnight streets, Adaeze held her son and watched the city move past the window. She thought about architecture, the thing she had studied, the thing she had built her career from. The way a structure that looks complete from the outside can be in the middle of its most important construction. The way foundation work is invisible and unglamorous and entirely the point. She thought about what it meant to build something real. Dae-hyun, in the front seat, was on the phone again, doing what she imagined he had always done when faced with a threat. Not panicking, not retreating, but constructing. Building walls and corridors, moving pieces, using the very architecture of the world that had frightened her as the material of their protection. It was not simple. It was not safe. It was not over. But Kofi was breathing against her collarbone, one small hand fisted in her sweater, and the rain was coming down harder now over Gangnam's glass towers. And somewhere in the city, a father was fighting for the right to be something his world did not have a great record of producing. And Adaeze, who had crossed an ocean to survive, who had built an entire life from the raw material of her own determination, Adaeze was still here, still fighting, still, against every reasonable probability, not entirely without hope. Seoul at midnight in the rain. The smell of it, the weight of it, the strange and specific beauty of a city that has always known how to survive. The heir to everything was asleep, and his mother was watching the road ahead.
If you're new here, welcome to the Afro-Korean vibes. This is the kind of story we tell. Come back for part 2.
Like, subscribe, share with someone who loves a story that tells the truth about love. See you next time.